So like we talked about in the first part of this episode, we just want everything to be doing its job by the time we've got to this stage in the gym. Now, with the mentorship content, a lot of what we'll be pushing up to this point with a rehab exercise is being obsessed with what's happening through the hand and obsessed with what's happening through the feet. So for the sake of this episode, we're just going to focus on the feet, and we can have some external cues through the feet that's going to help us engage certain tissues and take load away from other tissues. So if you just grab the bar for a second, Sarah. So the first thing I want you to do, Sarah, is just deadlift. So I want you to keep all the weight on the heels and just deadlift up to the top again. Good. And back down again. So weight on the heels and deadlift up to the top. Nice, good. And just keep doing that for about 5 reps. So if you look at Sarah's knees here, when all the weight's on the heels, she's got no choice but to snap her knees back. When Sarah snaps her knees back, stop there for a second. So the only thing snap the knees back, the only thing she's got left now to pull with is her back. So that's going to put her back under a lot of stress. If you just bend your knees again, Sarah. So this time when you pull up, Sarah, I want you to shift the weight forwards onto the midfoot and then pull from there, keeping the midfoot pressing, keeping your knees forwards and up to the top. Nice, good. And back down again and just lift like that again. So weight on the midfoot on the way up. So when we get the weight on the midfoot on the way up, we're actually going to be able to recruit a lot more glute and a lot more hip. So when we snap the knees back, so snap them back again, Sarah. In this position now, we have to use our back. So in this position, we've achieved passive hip extension almost lower down at the glute, at the hip. And now from here, when you pull, we have to extend through our back. Whereas when we go to the other way of doing it, if you go back down to the bottom again, and the weight shift forwards to the midfoot, keeping the knees over the toes, now we're actually able to use our glute, and we're going to have a lot less back involved. So obviously we're going to use some back here, I don't mind that, but I don't want the back to be the predominant muscle that's extending us back up. We want the glute to do the majority of the work, and then the back just to help out a little bit. Perfect, you can relax there and put the bar down. So the way to think about this is, whenever we actually use our glute functionally, or whenever we hip extend functionally, our weight's going to be on the midfoot. So if I'm walking, when I go to hip extension, my weight's going towards my midfoot and toes. Same if we think of an Olympic lift, if I'm going as soon as I start my second pull, again, that weight's going to be shifting forwards to my midfoot. If I'm going up into a snatch or a clean and jerk, that weight's going to be shifting forwards to my midfoot, forefoot as I hip extend. So neurologically, it doesn't make much sense for us to stay on the heels when we're hip extending with some lifts. And yet a lot of even coaches and a lot of personal trainers and strength and conditioning coaches actually coach people to stay on the heels. Now I can completely understand the reason there, because a lot of people go so far towards the toes, and heels into hip flexion is fine. So on the way down, we're fine to go onto the heels, but as we pull back up, I almost wanted my hips to translate forwards and get good hip extension. And not that I would, but I should be able to keep a flexed spine and deadlift and extend my hips. If my weight's at my heels, I've got no way of doing that because I've got nowhere else to go. So I have no choice now but to snap my knees back, use a lot of quads, and then pull through my lower back. And obviously I'm exaggerating that a little bit, but if you look at people deadlifting next time you go to the gym, you're going to see that strategy a lot. It might be a little bit more subtle than that, but they're going to achieve a hip knee extension very, very early, but before they get to the top of the movement, the knees are going to be straight. If somebody's extending the knees in a deadlift, it should be right at the very end when they get to the top, after hip extension has taken place. So module 12 is fairly straightforward. So again, up to this point, we've really covered the concepts in detail by the time we've got to module 12 on the mentorship. And the concepts are the exact same. We're just applying those concepts now. Instead of our rehab exercises, we're applying them to more common lifts in the gym. So we briefly covered the deadlift in today's episode, but obviously then we cover these with the squat, we cover for the upper limb as well, pulling exercise, pushing exercises, step ups, etc. And if we can get our athletes moving well in the gym and getting good weight distribution through the whole foot, good weight distribution through the whole hand, and basically just good movement variability, we can set our athletes up for good performance, but more importantly, like long-term pain relief and long-term injury prevention as well, which is really, really important. So yeah, I don't think there's anything groundbreaking new, Sarah, in module 12. Would you agree?
Not really. I just think the weight pressures, especially in the feet and the hands as well, completely change an exercise. Like even when I was doing it with the ladies in the gym before, it was completely different as to when I've done this module.
Nice, yeah.
So yeah.
No, it's a good point, and especially I think with any movements and stuff like that, we kind of almost patterned them with the heels and the heels and hand and stuff, and you can blast out 100 press ups or whatever on the heels and hand, get someone onto the mid hand and fingers, and they struggle like hell, because they were not used to distributing force through our forearms. And again, I have no problem with someone being on the heel to the hand, but I want them to have options. And that's the big thing, I think, is giving people movement options. And obviously the more options our body has and our brain has, the less likely we're going to be to overload certain tissues and get injured. So again, if somebody is a power lifter, for example, I treat a lot of power lifters and they lift through the heels, I'm not going to stop them lifting through the heels, but at the same time I want them to be able to do that lift that way as well. And if they've got a lot of back pain in their training, I definitely want them to be lifting that way instead, to let their back settle down. So I appreciate the sport specific stuff, I appreciate there's other ways of doing things, but from my perspective and her perspective, we want to make sure they've got options. I think that's the key point. So I think just to briefly recap the whole system. So obviously the most important thing is from everything from the subjective assessment. So for the first session, we've done a subjective assessment, we've done an objective assessment. We can link the objective assessment findings to the person's story so that we've got complete clarity on what the problem is, and we can develop a treatment plan specific to their end goal that really lays out the steps that we need to get towards to make sure they're going to be successful with that. And then with our treatment, every single treatment session is just get them along to the next stage of the plan. We're building resilience. By the time we get halfway through the treatment plan, the pain should be gone, and then we've got another few sessions to really build the resilience up and challenge them with the variables of load, challenging them with the variables of speed, volume, impact, and making sure they can tolerate all those things before we discharge them. And that's the key point, is we're really making sure people are ready for discharge by the time we kind of send them away. What's your overall kind of impressions? It's been a intense 12 weeks, but what's your overall impressions?
It's been good, and the last two have really helped to summarise it as well. So you've got like your sport specific stuff, and then getting people in the gym as well, which is taking us to that next level where they'd be more advanced than what they would maybe day to day. So I think, yeah, it's been really, really good.
Not perfect. And if there is any questions, again, pop them down below in the comments, and we can answer all those as well.